So the next step is to get this post, which was generated by ChatGPT, in Markdown format. Now, Markdown simply is a special kind of text formatting in the end, which is all about adding special kind of annotations to plain text to, for example, highlight headings, links, images, bold text, and more. Now, why would you use Markdown? Well, for example, because maybe you have a website that needs the content that should be displayed to website visitors in Markdown format as input. That would be a common use case. Or maybe because you have some other kind of tool or program that needs Markdown content as input to then, for example, generate PDF documents or anything else. So it's simply a text format that's commonly used to input text into other programs or services. So to get this blog post, this full blog post with the visuals and the links in Markdown format, we could send the following prompt to ChatGPT. Now give me the underlying Markdown formatted as code, which in general could already be enough to make sure that we get the underlying Markdown code that could be used to format this blog post as code, so formatted in such a code block in ChatGPT's response. But I also added some extra context here to my prompt because I want to make sure that all these links and all these visuals that have been added by ChatGPT, but that have only been added by telling me where they should be added instead of the entire blog post being regenerated, I want to make sure that those visuals and those links are part of that Markdown so that ChatGPT really gives me the full blog post with all the links and all the visuals in that Markdown format, and then in its output formatted as code, so in such a code block. And if I send this to ChatGPT, it goes ahead, generates a response, and indeed gives me such a code block, which now contains the content of the blog post in Markdown format. Now here for me, it's struggling to identify which kind of code it's outputting here. It's not identifying this as Markdown here, but what it's giving me here is indeed valid Markdown, and it does, for example, contain links, so that works. These lines just tend to be pretty long here, but that's okay. It is giving me that blog post, and it does have that Markdown formatting. Now here for me, it then again ran out of words in its response here, so I would have to continue, but I also already see that it actually did not give me the blog post it gave me before in plain text, because in that plain text blog post, for example, in that building blocks area, it's explaining the self-attention mechanism and multi-head attention and so on. It's adding explanations here. Now in the Markdown it gave me, it instead just gives me a list without explanations here. So instead of requesting it to continue, I'll request that it fixes this Markdown content and reflects the actual blog post from before. So I'll try to get the actual blog post content by sending this follow-up prompt here, where I first criticize it. Alternatively, I could have also asked it whether this really is the correct content, but here I'll try to get the right content by criticizing it. And then I tell it what I want and that I need that in Markdown format, formatted as such a code block. So let's see what I'll get here now. It's again telling me about those images, which is nice, but not really useful, but nonetheless. Now it's continuing here. It's again generating that Markdown content, this time hopefully with the actual blog post content. But even though this is looking better here, I can already see that, for example, for the self-attention mechanism and again multi-head attention and so on, it added some explanations here, but these are kind of the old bad explanations, not the improved ones that include examples. So this is still not the correct output here. Therefore, I'll wait until it's done generating here, even though I could stop it, but I'll wait until it's done, and I'll then try another technique where I ask it whether this really is the correct content. Like this. Let's see what it answers. It says it detected some differences, so let's see what it's generating now. And it's still not getting there. These are still the old explanations, and it even forgot one point, because between the first heading and the second heading about the building blocks, we actually had this understanding ChatGPT part earlier. And that got left out now. So I'll now try a different technique, and I'll grab this missing paragraph here as an example for something that's missing from the response. And I'll wait for it to finish its output here. And I'll send this prompt here to ChatGPT, where I say, this is still not the right output. And then I'll provide an example to ChatGPT for some content that's missing. I then also add this extra instruction that it should make sure that this and also any other missing content is re-added. Now let's see if that helps ChatGPT identify the correct blog post from earlier in the chat history, so that it then hopefully gives me the right output here in Markdown format. Now here, as it's generating this response, I can tell that these explanations for the self-attention mechanism and so on still are off, so we're still not getting there. And I'm showing this in great detail because this is absolutely something that can happen when working with ChatGPT. Especially if you're getting a long chat history like this one, ChatGPT tends to forget things and mix things up. And that's why you should not blindly rely on its output. It may contain errors, like here, where it's continuing to produce wrong output, or to be precise, not the kind of output we want. So what I'll do now is I'll grab a bit chunk of that correct blog post with which I'm happy, which it should give me in Markdown format, enriched with those extra visuals and links, and I'll try another prompt. And I'll say, this is still wrong. The blog post you should provide in Markdown format, formatted as code, starts with the following content. And then here I'll paste in that big chunk of content, which I copied. And then I'll add another instruction below. And I'll say, the above text is from an earlier response generated by you. Give me that full blog post, not just this excerpt, which I passed here to ChatGPT in Markdown format, formatted as code. Include those extra visuals and links you showed earlier. So with that, it goes ahead and outputs the response, and I had to regenerate the response off screen once because I accidentally left the screen, and also because initially it forgot to add this link here, for example. It did add it now, so sometimes regenerating a response can also help you get a better response. But I then actually stopped the generation here because whilst the beginning now seems to be correct, I can already see that here for the tokenization part, for example, if you scroll to the right, you see that here it ends with learn more about tokenization and a nice link. That's of course not what I want, because if I take a look at that original blog post that it generated for me, then I can see that in the tokenization section there, it does not lead to some other page, but instead it explains tokenization with an example what's missing now. So overall here, we can conclude that, at least for me, it does not seem to be able to really pick up that blog post again, probably because it's so long and the entire chat history is already getting quite long. And even if we still are within that token limit, that context window, you could say, ChatGPT still can produce suboptimal results if it has to process a lot of input and a lot of tokens, at least in my experience here. So what we should probably do here to get this article with visuals and links in Markdown format is that we start a new chat, we manually add those visuals and those links it shared earlier in the sections where they should be added, and we then send a prompt to ChatGPT that includes this blog post, asking it to convert this blog post to Markdown for us. And that should then typically do the trick. This might be the preferable approach here. In this case, I'll not do it, simply to not waste your time, but I absolutely wanted to show you how you could generally ask for Markdown format. And as you see, that also worked. But I also wanted to highlight that here we're seeing some ChatGPT limitations in the end. Because as you can tell, even though I tried different approaches, in the end I did not really get the correct result here.